everybody, and welcome. I'm so excited to be here with you all today. Welcome to the official Business of Belonging launch party. I see you all in the chat. I'm so excited. Live from the Rocky Mountains in Canada. It's a beautiful day here. A beautiful day to celebrate a beautiful thing, which is the book. Start off by telling where you're calling in from in the chat. Are you calling in from where you normally live? Are you in the jungle? Are you in a city? Let us know where you're calling in from and include an emoji that sums up where you're calling in from. I would use the mountains. That's where I'm calling in from. And I'm so excited to be calling in from the mountains today because we have an amazing show for you. I am about to bring on the man of the hour. This is the founder of CMX. He is the VP of Community at Bevy and the author of The Business of Belonging, which is the book of the month. Please join me in welcoming David Spinks.
Hello.
Hi, David. How are you?
I'm doing very well, Beth. I'm coming from, I don't know, it'd be a guitar emoji because I'm in Nashville visiting my wife's family for a couple weeks, hence all the guitars. I'm not that cool. None of these are mine, but he does have a really cool clock that everyone compliments on all my Zoom calls.
Yeah, I do love that clock. I've definitely been peeping it in some of our other Zoom calls. Well, I'm so excited to have you today and to talk about this book. And I wonder if, okay, I have a question for you. You've been working on this book for as long as I've known you. So I would love if you would tell our audience, how does it feel now that your book is in the hands of the CMX community?
Yeah, not just the CMX community. It's lots of community builders. The coolest thing is like seeing people that I've never met before, haven't, I don't recognize from the community, talking about the book or sharing pictures. It's pretty surreal. It feels incredible, honestly. Like people kept asking me how I felt leading up to the launch, when it was in like pre-sale mode. They'd be like, "How do you feel? You must be so excited." And I mostly just felt really anxious, I think. So I'd like kind of put on a smile, I'd be like, "Yeah, I'm like super excited. It's really cool." But like deep down, I was like sweating bullets. And I think, you just don't know how you spend so long working on a book. And I put mine together in 9 months. Usually it's like 18 plus months when you work with a publisher. You just spend so long, you go through it and you overthink every line and every chapter and the title and the cover and everything. And then it's just like, it's out there and you just kind of get like one chance and like, hopefully people like it. So I think that was just nerve-wracking and brought like a decent level of anxiety. But then as soon as it like officially launched and people started getting it in the mail and posting selfies with it and pictures with their dogs and like friends I haven't spoke to from high school in like 2 decades are messaging me and they're all like proud and excited. It all feels very cool and surreal, and I'm very grateful.
I love that. I remember when people started posting pictures like a day after we had kind of talked about it, and I was like, man, overnight shipping, that's surprising. It was surprising how quickly people were just like, I need this book, and taking pictures with it and celebrating with it.
Yeah, some people got it before it even officially launched, because I guess if you pre-ordered, Amazon was just like got it out there really quick. So someone was like, yeah, I'm already on chapter 6. And I was like, I literally didn't know that anyone had the book yet.
Well, I would love if you would tell us a little bit more as well about, you did a lot of surveys in the community, like you talked about the title for a long time. How was it going to be laid out? All of the frameworks and stuff. So how did you settle on the title, Business of Belonging?
Yeah, it's actually kind of a funny story because The Business of Belonging was one of the first titles that came to mind for me, maybe the first one. And I was like, oh yeah, this is really cool. This is really interesting. And I liked it. But then like you start working with the publisher and you just start coming up with ideas. And at first the publisher was like not so hot on it because they were giving me feedback that they wanted something much more explicit. That's like, like community management, like community strategy. Like they want you to like read the title and immediately know like this is what you're going to learn in the book. And so we like ended up brainstorming. I think I came up with 200 to 300 names for this book. And like I have full notebook pages written with ideas. I have notes on my phone. I have like emails I wrote to myself, just like it'll just keep coming to me. And we came up with all these different ideas and ended up actually settling on a different title. I think it was like the Community Advantage. And my editor liked it, so he like pitched it to the marketing team at the publisher, and the marketing team didn't like it, and they turned it down. And like I actually felt a sense of relief when they turned it down because I actually didn't really love it, but it was just kind of like we need to choose something. And then I was like, all right, back to the drawing board. And I was looking back through all my ideas. And then I like went all the way to the beginning of the list, and like the business of belonging was still there. And I was like, that one always stuck in my head. Just something about like the play on words. I think it's important, and it kind of sets the tone for the conversation in the book, because there's been countless books written about community over many, many years, and some incredible books. If I was sitting at home, you'd see my bookshelf is filled with books about community, but most of them don't really lean into the topic of building community for a business. And some even shy away from it because it feels a little weird to talk about belonging and business in the same sentence. And that's really what I wanted to achieve with this, is to not shy away from that, to really lean into that conversation of like, what does it mean to build community in the context of business? And so we ended up repitching that, and actually the marketing team loved it, and on we went.
I don't think I'm alone when I say that the business of belonging, just that sentence, really does resonate with what I do as a community professional. You kind of do wear two hats. You wear the business hat to prove the value of what you're doing and, make sure that you're keeping the lights on. And then you also you're wearing the hat of belonging, and you're, engineering these places for people to build relationships and make meaningful connections. So I, for one, am happy that this is the title you went with.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And it's a challenge that anyone who does this work find themselves in, is kind of balancing between this like really authentic belonging building and like talking to community members and creating connection, and then also like internally advocating for the community value, getting buy-in from executives, measurement. And sometimes it feels like those things are in conflict, right? There's like tension in the phrase the business of belonging. But I hope that after reading this book, it feels like a much more cohesive narrative in your head, and you know how to balance those things and do both of them really well simultaneously.
David, I could talk to you about this for 2 more hours, which I'm glad about, because we're going to. But we're going to move to the next little piece of our event here, which is a panel. And I wonder if you would like to introduce what we're doing next.
Yeah, absolutely. So very excited for this panel, because it's like I got to just pick and choose 3 of the people that I respect most in the world of community building, and 3 people that I've gotten to know pretty well over the course of my career building community, and just get to, pick their brain a little bit on their story. And all of their stories are in the book as well. And so when you read the book, you'll get to hear more about them, but just very excited to be able to kick off with this conversation. So yeah, I think let's welcome our panelists to the stage. Hello, everybody.
Hello. Very happy to be here.
Hello.
Awesome. So just to introduce you 3, and first, thank you for joining in this conversation and for being a part of the book. Like I said, y'all are like some of the people I respect most in this world, and just grateful for every moment I get to hang out with you and talk about community. It's always a blast, and I always learn a ton. I think everyone else is going to learn a lot right now too. So going in order here, Naj is the founder of Ethel's Club and Somewhere Good. And Ethel's Club has just got this incredible story where Naj started it started it as a co-working space, and then COVID hit, and you just had to completely rebuild it from the ground up as a virtual platform. And speaking with you and your vision for Somewhere Good and taking it into like an entire ecosystem for communities specifically focused on people of color. And it's just such an incredible story, and very excited to have you here.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here. Very excited to be sharing space with all of you today.
Awesome. And Alice, we have Ellen next. And Ellen, we go ways back. You spoke at the very first CMX Summit, which is a story I talk about in the book as well, because I just like blindly emailed you, I think, and I was like, you have such a cool story. Would you please come keynote this event? And you, I don't think you knew me at the time, but you were just like, a conference about community. Sure, yeah, let's do it. And you came and you just crushed it with an incredible keynote to close out that event and share the story of Apple and the Apple User Group program that you helped build up from the ground up. And so excited to learn more about that story today as well. So thanks for joining, Ellen. And Allison. So Allison and I we go way back as well, back to our New York days. I think we met when you were still working at Google originally.
Yeah.
And then you started Tech Ladies out of New York. And I remember going to some of those early events and being one of the few males who got to be a part of that community in the space and be involved in it, and just got to watch you build that community from the ground up. And kind of Tech Ladies and CMX kind of grew up together a lot over the years. And you've just been someone that I've turned to over and over again whenever I'm stuck or have questions. And you've been a great mentor for me. So again, 3 incredible people here that I've learned to turn from, and very excited to have you here too, Allison.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Sorry, my questions disappeared. So I would love to maybe just have each of you kind of in like a quick, like 1 minute, what's your story? Like, how did you first get started building community? Maybe we'll start with you, Naj.
Yeah, I can jump in. I started to build community in sort of a haphazard manner. I was frustrated and looking for a physical space in New York where I could feel seen and celebrated in my identity, and could not find it. And I'm really good at Googling, and I still couldn't find it. And in that, I think, desperation, I started to talk to other people and say, wouldn't it be cool if there was a place where you could hang out and, see cool art and meet people, and I don't know, maybe find a therapist, like, it just sort of do everything. Someone should make that. And that sort of became my calling card for like 6 months. I'd always talk about this like mythical place that did not exist. And then I remember a close friend of mine said, why don't you start it? And I was like, what do I know about starting, anything really? I'd worked at startups in the past, but it seemed really daunting, but at the same time, not so much, because it was so clear to me what was missing from both a personal perspective and also a business perspective. When looking at the market in terms of how it was growing, to, as for people who identify as a person of color, and how few products center and celebrate who they are, it seemed like an obvious, I should build something in that space. And so Ethel's Club was built with that in mind, really just being a space where a person of color could walk in and not feel stressed out or like an other, not tokenized. They could sort of just be themselves and really unburdened in that way. And we built the first Ethel's Club and opened doors in November of 2019. And then 4 months later, coronavirus happened. And, we had this beautiful 5,000 square foot space in, East Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and had to take this big thing and like turn it into a tiny, or what felt was going to be tiny, digital experience. It was actually quite the opposite. We grew from about 180 members to over 1,000 globally, almost overnight. And from then it's just been about keeping up with the growth, and, trying to make all of our members around the world content with what we're building.
Yeah, and those are all paying members, right?
Yes, those are all paying members.
Right, paying members. And you told me, I think you're doing like 3 events every day, something
Yeah,
like that.
so we actually scaled that back.
Okay,
It
good.
was not
Good.
a sustainable model. But in the very beginning of the pandemic, we were talking to our members of the physical space, and we basically said, we're going to shut down. What would you want digitally? And I think at that time, we had no idea. We were like, I don't know, it'd be cool if we could watch concerts. Like, it was so different than where we are now.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing people asked for was they wanted a sense of habit. They wanted a place they could kind of come back to mimic them coming to the space every day. And so our offering was 3 events per day at 9, 3, and 6 that centered you in a different way. We've scaled that back to 1 per day, but the same ethos still applies.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. Ellen, can you introduce yourself quickly and your story starting in community?
Thank you. Well, it was 1985, a long time ago. How many of you out there remember 1985? I'm probably one of the few. And by the way, I want to show you what things looked like in the 80s when we wanted to communicate before the internet, before even email, certainly before mobile phones. We would do things like write articles in newsletters like this. Now, one of the things that I found at Apple, and I do have more goodies to show in a short while, but one of the things that I experienced at Apple is every time I spoke with a customer, a user, I learned something of value. And I found something that made me a better user myself. So I valued greatly this opportunity to connect with other people. And when I took the job being Apple's first user evangelist, which was really the community evangelist, we had no way of connecting with these people. And actually, there was a sense that there was all of this latent potential out there for them to add value to the entire Apple experience, but we had no way to harness it. And it was really believing in that power of community to make us better that gave me the inspiration to end up doing what I did. And David has some great questions about that. But I'd like to read from this little newsletter from 1985. And it says here, in the longer term, user groups are more important, she says. They support our installed base and our potential owners through word of mouth and through their ongoing sophisticated interest in our products. Simply put, they expand our market. That's the business of belonging. And I think the story that I am so lucky to take from those early Apple days and really pioneering the first digital connection between a company and its users was really about that opportunity to expand and enrich our markets through community.
Love it. It's such an incredible story. I have some follow-up questions for you, but let's have Allison introduce yourself.
Sure.
Hi there. My community is called Tech Ladies, and the reason I started it was because I was a woman in a male-dominated field is like the really short answer. And I felt like I needed to expand my network outside of the few women that I worked with, and then also be able to discuss like things that were actually happening at work. And so we started as a really small meetup in New York. It was just like, oh, what if somebody I know who works at a different company invites some women from their company to come and just have coffee. And so we would have coffee like every Friday. This was like the really early days. It all happened in person. And then we realized like there's so much powerful stuff being talked about in this community. It can't just be us who's going through major issues, and it wasn't. And so now we have 100,000 members. We're still seeing the same things pop up, like not being paid fairly for the same work, sexual harassment issues at work, some just more fun stuff, like wanting to meet other women in your field, wanting to see other women doing the job that you're doing, because a lot of women are still the only one on their team. So just that sense of like not being the only one was really powerful in bringing Tech Ladies together. And we still see all of that today. So it's been fun. Since then, we've grown out. We have an online community. We do events every week. We have a really active job board for helping you to find your next job. So there's a lot of pieces to it now, but it started as just a meetup in person.
I love it. It's become such an incredible community. And every day I feel like I'm seeing updates of women in your community, just like celebrating some achievement or like rallying around somebody who's like struggling with someone, and they get 100 comments of people supporting them. So you've built something really special there. So Ellen, 1985, that's it's pretty surreal to think about you building community and just figuring it out back in the day, and just seeing how far things have come. And I've kind of proclaimed in this book that the community-driven business era has arrived. I'm curious, what have you seen really changed since those first early days at Apple in terms of how businesses are investing in community today, and how it seems to have moved away from just kind of being this like cost to actually being something that's driving growth?
So many changes. I think the first thing to remember is that there was no known way of connecting digitally at the time that these started. And it's so funny reading this article here. I love it. Apple hires evangelists to deal with user groups. And there's a little bit of the mindset, like almost the customer as nuisance. I mean, I hate to say it, but that was a little bit of what it was like at that time. And by the way, when you look at what a customer had to go through to surface a concern or a complaint, it was usually filling out a form, mailing it, waiting 2 weeks until you got a response back, maybe pick up a phone and talk to somebody. It was a whole different world. So I think companies resisted at that time because there was so much friction between the person out there who needed something from belonging and the mechanisms, the very clunky and friction-rife mechanisms for dealing with them. The arrival of, getting from hammer and chisel to bold innovations like email and the internet, and then now social media, has really changed the entire relationships that companies have with their communities and that companies can have with their communities. And it's also changed that balance of power. The community member also has a tremendous amount of power to make their voice heard in ways that were not available 40 years ago. Now, I also have to pick up, though, on what Naj and Allison said, and that is both of you really voiced this thing of affinity, of people finding strength in being together. And what companies, I do believe, have realized is that they have a tremendous advantage to gain from their customers' knowledge and conversations, because very often the customers are going to be pushing the edge of the reality that a product or a service exists in. And we can learn so much from them. Community allows us to bring it back together and bring it back into the company, into the fold. And when a company gets that edge of innovation and has exposure to it, they are given the opportunity to learn and even act on ideas that might not have originated internally in ways that really reflect what people are actually seeking and can drive the business forward.
I love it. Yeah, it's surreal to see how that mentality has shifted over time, and I think we're like at the start of like yet another kind of entire phase of a whole new wave of community, and now that like everyone's interested, now it's going to like evolve again and develop. Mm-hmm. And I think actually part of that is this growing focus and awareness of DEI and inclusiveness in community. And I've kind of been talking a lot about in the book, I talk about this, like how community and DEI are inseparable, because you're essentially choosing to create a social space, and you get to choose who's included and who's not, and what the norm is and what isn't. And Naj, in the book, I have a quote from you, and it's something you said to me a while back, and it always stuck with me, so I had to include it in the book, which is just that when a community makes someone feel seen for who they are, everything else just kind of falls into place. Mm-hmm. And you talked with me a lot about how you did that at Ethel's Club and how you made people feel seen, and we share that story in the book. Can you talk a little bit about why that was really important to you and how you made your members feel seen, both in your physical space and then digitally once you had to move into that world?
Sure. I love that quote. I forgot I said that. I'm glad that you have it written down in your book.
I love it when people write down things that we say that were really good and then we forget about it.
The reason it was so important is that people of color are so rarely given space where they can fully show up as themselves in the truest form of what that means, that when they're offered that, most people are legitimately brought to tears. We had it was like a running joke when we opened the clubhouse, where we had a box of tissues near the front door because people would walk in and they would just be overwhelmed by just the idea that this space exists and they can spend time there. A lot of the ways in which we brought that to life in the physical space through the interior design was not just in the artwork being created by people of color or the books, but it was in more sort of nuanced ways. You mentioned the idea of feeling seen. We took that literally, and the first thing you saw when you walked into Ethel's Club was a mirror. The main thing you saw on most of the walls were mirrors. And the reason behind that was we wanted to really hammer home the idea that the space is comprised of the people. Yes, it's beautiful, and we spend a lot of time and energy on our amazing couches, but what makes up a community are the people that are inside it. And so we really wanted to make sure that people understood that from the beginning. And then outside of that, like I mentioned, we had really amazing books. One of our members was a first-generation American. She was Vietnamese. And she came up to me. I spent a lot of time in the clubhouse because, like Ellen mentioned, we have always led by the idea that of our community and users sort of being first. So we literally worked alongside them in the clubhouse. But she came up to me and she brought a book, and she was near tears, which is our brand. And she said, you know, where did you find this book? And I'm like, I don't remember, like somewhere. I think our interior designer found it somewhere. And she was overwhelmed because her parents, moved here and immediately wanted to assimilate to American culture. And so she grew up never seeing Vietnamese art until she was at Ethel's Club. And so those magical moments that, you know, shape a person's life around something that they hadn't even thought about is something we have always chased as a brand. And so really trying to hone in on that emotional feeling has been a driver for us since day one. What that looks like digitally now is obviously a little bit different. You can't bring people into a space in that manner, but we have such a strong brand that people come into it. And still, if you look up Ethel's Club on Twitter, people talk about crying at our events. There is this idea that you are digitally and visually looking at people who look like you, who share those lived experiences with you, where you just feel an overwhelming sense that you don't get digitally either, which is a whole other enormous problem, right? It's both physical and digital of what we're trying to solve, and where we see there's a need. But I think a lot of it is in those small things where we say at the beginning of a call, you know, these are our community guidelines, and this is how we ask people to respect the space. We do things like we ask for pronouns when people join Zoom. We ask that you change your name so that it has there, so people can call you, by the way that you prefer. So just a lot of things like that have built up over time. Also, because we've talked to our community. You know, we said, what's been your favorite Zoom you've been on? What has been the best community practice that you want us to ensure we build into our fabric? And they've told us, and then we did it, which is always like the magic of Ethel's Club, which is that people tell us things and then all we do is act upon them, and people are like, wow, this is so incredible. But you know, we believe in our community and building what they want. And it's a humbling job to just kind of create that kind of space every day.
I love it. Yeah. I mean, even your digital site, like you land on your homepage, and I love to use the Ethel's Club homepage as an example of how to like intentionally design for community, and the language you use, the colors, the people that you display on the page. I love, like, you even like have a soundtrack at the bottom of like different kinds of music. It all speaks to an identity that basically informs somebody when they arrive, like, is this for me or not?
Right.
And you've just done such an incredible job of that.
Thank you.
And on that topic of identity, Allison, you've also done an incredible job of that. And I think yours is a really interesting example, because in the book, we talk a lot about identity and creating a social identity. And almost always you find opportunities in community by getting more specific, right? Kind of like what Naj did, right? It's like there's kind of a very broad overview or spaces, like co-working spaces for like all these people, but as a result, specific people don't feel included. And so you create a space that's more specific and more intentional. For you, it's a little bit different in that you found that there were actually groups for like female developers in tech, but like females who worked in tech broadly, not necessarily just engineers, people who are non-technical, like didn't have a space. And so there's an opportunity to get broader in that identity. Can you speak a little bit about like what that identity was that you really honed in on and how you created a space intentionally for them?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this was really interesting early on because I worked in product and marketing in tech. And so I didn't fit in with any of the groups that were for women in engineering, which are all still amazing. And like, we need different resources for different groups. But I found that it was also really interesting for me personally to build my network with women who worked across all sorts of different jobs in tech, especially since when you work at, a lot of our members work at smaller startups. So you're working across teams, right? It's not like you're in some totally separate building, these people who do other things. So it's great and wonderful to meet people who are working on different things. And also you might not be working on the same thing forever. So that was part of it. It was just like, I want to meet cool women working on different stuff, even if it's not what I'm an expert in. And so it's been, you know, like anything else, when you're deciding how to define your community, there's pluses and minuses. If you're really, really specific, you can find your people really quickly. But then you also kind of hit a limit of how big it can get, which might be great. Like you might want to just find people who are, you know, doing this one very specific thing in this one very specific state, right? Like that might be an amazing community and just might be designed to be smaller. Like we wanted to build something big and really impactful in the industry because our larger mission is to connect women in tech with amazing opportunities. And we just didn't really want like a limit on that. So it's been great and made it, I think, so much richer to be able to meet women who are working on all different things. And in our smaller community, our founding membership community, it's also really nice because you can find people who are doing what you're doing, but you can also just be inspired by people who are doing other things that might be, hey, I didn't even know that could be a career for me. I didn't even know that was a job, you know? And so you'll stay longer because you can grow into by meeting different people who are doing it. You're not just, okay, I've gotten everything I can out of this community. I've already met all of the types of people that I already know, you know? That means we'll have a lot more longevity, I think.
Yeah, I love that. It resonates too with CMX and that story of how we started in terms of like community managers just felt like very one-off and isolated. And it was like giving them a community where they saw other people like them doing work like them. They felt valued, they felt understood. As a result, I think people stuck with their careers a lot longer. And like, those are the best stories I love to hear, is when someone's like CMX is why I kept doing this, because before that, I just didn't even feel like this was a career I could have. I'm gonna ask you each one last question on community building. But for the audience, if you have questions, we're gonna open up to a few questions here. So please add your questions to Q&A. For the panel, we'll have about 5 minutes to get to your questions as well. So my last question for you three is, you know, we've all been working in community for a long time. I've tried to condense a lot of my lessons and insights into like what is a formula for building community, or what are like the most important lessons for building community into something that's repeatable. I'm curious to hear from each of you. What do you think is like one piece of advice that you'd give to someone that really sums up like the thing that matters most in order to build community and a true sense of belonging in your community, in like roughly a Twitter size piece of advice? Ellen, maybe you could kick us off.
Love to. You know, I come back to that edge, like really pay attention to the edge. What are the new things that are emerging at that very edge of the community as it continues to grow and expand, either in size and scope, or perhaps even in the types of things it works on? Listen closely to that edge and bring the things from the edge into the heart of the community, and even into the heart of the company or entity that sponsors the community. That's where the learning and opportunity is.
I love it. Focus on the edge. All right. Naj?
Yeah. Can I comment on what Ellen shared? Because I think we did that, and it totally shaped our company and community. So we are a social and wellness club, and that's what we're known as today. But our focus on wellness was like all the way over there. I was like, I want a podcast studio. I want like music, creative, and, you know, all the fancy stuff. And we had a couple of members keep talking about, and maybe it wasn't, they kept talking about it, but it came up enough, this idea of access to mental health therapists, or this idea of access to wellness, where I thought, you know what, let's just put a room in and we can allow for practitioners to come and connect with members. And it totally shaped everything about what Ethel's Club is today. If you ask someone, what is Ethel's Club, they'll most likely bring up the wellness and or mental health aspect, which was never a core part of our offering until we listened to our community. So I just wanted to speak to that really quickly because I'm like, wow, I did that and it's working. My Twitter advice would be to build intentionally from the beginning. I think a lot of people want to ship something and they want to get something to market and, we'll focus on that later. And I would urge you all to take the time to really think about what does your community stand for and more deep things like your values and your mission, but also how you deal. It'll influence how you are able to cope with the challenges that come because you have a strong foundation and framework that you've already built.
I love it. Build intentionally from day one. And I think that aligns with DEI as well. It's something that you and I spoke about and is in the book. It's like, if you don't do it intentionally from day one, now you have a disadvantage and it's going to be harder to get back on track later. Because if 99% of your community is white, people of color aren't going to come and be like, oh, this is a place for me. So starting that from day one creates that standard, and it's a lot easier to maintain that momentum than start from zero.
Exactly.
I love it. All right, Allison, bring us home.
Okay, I think whatever makes you weird is your greatest superpower. And so for thinking about building community, build the thing that you want. It sounds really simple, but the thing that makes you feel weird or separate from other people, you are not the only one. There are so many more people than you could ever imagine that feel that same way or want that same thing. And so if you can identify what that is for you, that is the way to figure out what type of community you should build. I know a lot of people are thinking about that now. And I would also say to build a real community, if you always go back to that and your mission, you will avoid building like a business first and then a community second and then trying to plug them in and then not wonder why it didn't work. So if it's authentic and it's real and it comes from you and it's you can find the other people who feel that way, and then you'll have something real.
I love that. Lean into your weirdness. It reminds me of a quote from Arlen Hamilton, which I think I mentioned in the book as well. When I interviewed her, she said, "Be yourself so that the people looking for you can find you."
Nice.
And that always really stuck with me, and I like it. You give me permission to be weird in CMX, and I'm going to keep being weird. Well, I have to ask then, what makes you weird, Allison?
I don't know. I think for me, it was feeling like a total outsider at work. And like, it was, why is this dream career really hard? Like, I thought it would be great. And then realizing that, oh, that's not just me. This is how tons of women feel at work. And there's systemic reasons we feel this way. So how can we support each other and like come together? And it's so, so powerful to do that.
Yeah. I love that. And like another way of framing being weird is like, what is the thing that you feel not included around, or what's the area where you don't feel belonging? You can find that by building community. Love it. All right, Beth, we got some questions.
Yes, we do. We've got a couple. I was hoping for some clarification about one of them before I ask it, but we've got one from Meg Green, who asks specifically about communities focused on around a group and not a specific product. What do you think is the best balance between developing a strategy for your community versus allowing the strategy to grow organically? Maybe this is a question for Naj and Allison specifically.
Sure, I can take it to start. I think it's just leaning into flexibility. I'm a type A perfectionist. It is totally the opposite of how I work, how I think, how I live. And I think it has become our strength. And I think especially after something like COVID, where, I had mapped out 10 years of physical locations, and within a day that was no longer valid. So I think flexibility and that sort of close-knit relationship with your community, where you have someone on the team, obviously a community person, who is talking to them and advocating for them and championing them to the rest of the team, so that we understand what's working and why. And I was going to say one other thing outside of the community aspect, flexibility. Oh yes, having those intentional frameworks to start with. it all kind of works, right? You know your parameters as a company, so that when people come in and offer either suggestions or advice, you know how far you can bend because you've already built in a framework versus try to make everyone happy, and then you end up with this product that does not honor your weirdness or your thing. It's not on the edge; it's sort of on lots of edges, kind of in the middle, and it's for no one all of a sudden. So I think flexibility allows you to build alongside your community off of a strong foundational framework.
That's actually a really good segue into the next question. So I appreciate your answer, Nash. Actually, how about this question could be for Ellen? In regards to, Miriella asks, is it important to serve your community? And if so, how do you ensure you reach the people who you want to serve versus serving the people you happen to reach? So how do you ensure people with distance to your community are still able to reach you?
Yeah, it's hard to answer that in a short response. There are two things that come to mind. First of all, I really love the concept of mutuality, and how do we make generous offerings to whatever community or whatever intention we serve. And one of the things I've spoken about with community leaders is to get out of the help mindset. You're not there to help them. They probably don't even need your help. You're there to create something mutual together. So that blend is very important to me. The other thing is how do we reach the people we wish to serve rather than, serve the people who've reached us? Every person is a community. And who do they know who is like what this community wishes to bring together and see? So I believe that the community members are the best advocate for multiplying and adding to the community. And I would activate and empower them to also be generous and create that mutuality by bringing others in. Thank you. It's a great question. Thanks.
Damn.
Great advice, Ellen.
That was damn, Ellen. Crushed it.
All right, we have time for one more question. And this one is from Damon. So Allison, why don't you take this one? We've gone from talking about technical debt in products to diversity debt for companies. Wow. And Damon is interested to learn more about what the community debt will be that people will have to pay down in the future if they don't prioritize it at the start.
Love that.
Big question.
Big question. Yeah. I think starting from a place of inclusiveness, like we were talking about before, is so important. Whether you're talking about building a community or a company or both, because it is very hard to go back and do it. And so we work with a ton of companies on the Tech Ladies job board. We do see like a lot of people starting to think about this more very early on, like in their first 5 hires, which is amazing to see like finally happening in tech. We still have a long, long way to go. But I think being intentional early about what you stand for also means what you want out of your community, like what you want it to be, but also what you don't want it to be, and what you will allow, and also what you won't allow. And having a North Star that you're always coming back to, holding people accountable to it, right? Like, especially if your community is on the internet, but works for in-person physical spaces as well. Super important. But just like defining that so that you don't have that debt when you're going back and saying, oh, wait, how did we accidentally build a community that's all white people? How did we accidentally build a company that's all white people or all men? Starting early is really great. And I'm glad people are starting to think and talk about this so that they're not in that debt.
I like that. And I love the how blunt, we need to be blunt and we need to talk about this right now, because if we don't, then, you might be in the future. Yeah, exactly. Too late, Ellen. That's right. David, thank you.
Of course. Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you all for joining the panel. Thanks for all the great questions from the community. You're all a huge inspiration to me, and just deeply grateful for all of your support and being involved in the book and hanging out with us today.
Thank you for having me. This is great.
Thank you all so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Go community.
Fantastic. Go community. That's what we should put on our next set of CMX t-shirts, I think, David.
I think so too. Yeah, we need some very soft t-shirts for quarantine.